Welcome to Good Enough with the Trauma Therapist, a podcast dedicated to empowering you to take control of your life, learning valuable strategies for healing and looking at mental health through a trauma-informed lens. Get ready to feel empowered and confident in managing your symptoms. And now, here is your host, licensed clinical social worker, EMDR therapist, and certified clinical trauma professional, Jamie Vollmoeller.
Welcome to Good Enough. I am your host, Jamie Vollmoeller, and today we are meeting with my dear friend and colleague, Seth Showalter. Seth is currently working on a project for Choir Publishing in regards to his second book being featured and discussing Christian white nationalism and Project 2025 specifically. And Seth will also be making them a course on how these policies affect the LGBTQ community. So today we're going to be doing another deep dive into Project 2025, and because it is so very, very important. And specifically with the LGBTQ community, there are some significant rollbacks on protections. Seth, how are you feeling today?
Feeling great. How are you, Jamie?
I am super stoked, actually. I stayed up all night doing this, so I'm really excited because I think that it clearly needs to be done because we're way too close right now. But I figured we'd honestly start with an overview of the forward of Project 2025 because it is going into how they view the LGBT community, I feel, as a whole. And I think it's really important context for the specific policies we will get into in this episode. So we're going to start with literally page 1 of Project 2025. So this is literally the forward, the first page, guys. And we get to like the second paragraph and they're already hating on transgender people. So I'm going to start at the beginning though. Today, America and the conservative movement are enduring an era of division and danger akin to the late 1970s, and children suffer to toxic normalization of transgenderism, with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries. That is literally where things start. They move on later on in the forward. Okay, page 4. The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for woke cultural warriors. This starts with deleting the term sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency regulation, contract grant regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. Ooh, I'm going to stop there because I feel like we gotta unpack this because that's a lot. It's a lot before I even move on to the next paragraph. Thoughts, my love?
So what they're doing is they're creating an us versus them paradigm, in which case what essentially they are categorizing an entire population of people as the enemy and then using them to promote their own ideology and way of life as the answer, essentially downgrading everyone that falls outside of that.
Exactly.
And what they're doing in essence is putting people down and pretending as if they are non-human or treating them as if they don't deserve to exist. And this is becoming policy. This is becoming actual U.S. legislation. And that is really terrifying because it goes against the very foundation of our Constitution. It goes against the very foundation of what we were formed as a country on. And it is scary. What are your thoughts on that, Jamie?
I 110% agree with you on all of that. It is their ideology. And for those of our viewers who don't know Seth, Seth, can you just talk about your upbringing in evangelical church? And because Seth has a very specific personal insight into what this ideology really breeds, right? And that is why I wanted him on, because that's his area of expertise. So Seth, I'm going to let you speak to that for a bit so people understand what you're conceptualizing this around.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to just introduce myself to everyone. My name is Seth Showalter. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and therapist. However, before becoming a therapist, I was born and raised in a really small town in Northwest Missouri in a very conservative Christian family. And I took the faith so seriously because I was a goody two-shoe, guys. Like, I was goody two-shoe. Like, I wanted to follow the rules and I wanted to be a good Christian boy. However, I happened to have same-sex attraction, as we would put it in Christian circles. I was gay. So what that means is that did not fly. Yeah, a little bit. That means that did not fly in the conservative Christian circle. And so when I graduated with my undergrad in social work, I decided that I wanted to do everything I could in my power to become straight. So I entered a Christian drug and alcohol rehab facility that tried to do that. They actually offered conversion therapy, a part of substance use treatment. And I went through it for 3 months, 90 days, or actually 89, I think, to try to become straight. And actually wrote an entire book entitled Finally Free, A Surrender to Authenticity, in which case I actually reveal and put forth the journal entries that I kept while I was in that program with my reflections of what I think now, 10 years, 11 years later, looking back on that experience. But when we talk about what it was like growing up in a conservative Christian family, I mean, I took this stuff very seriously. I was born and raised Southern Baptist. So when we're talking Christian, I mean very conservative Christian. Like drums and guitars were not allowed on the stage. Speaking in tongues was not allowed. Like, we were very, very conservative. You were not allowed to drink alcohol. You were not allowed to smoke cigarettes. You were not allowed to cuss or curse or take the Lord's name in vain or do all of these different things that are considered sin or missing the mark in many Christian circles. What do you got, Jamie?
What my question to you is, what is the rhetoric, right, in that circle that you received growing up in that around outsiders of the group? Was it, what Jesus preaches, which is, we love everyone and we should support everyone? Or was it something different, Seth?
Oh, it was very different. I don't know.
I got a feeling.
Yeah. So the idea here is that we still love individuals that fall outside of the circle because we are called to evangelize. Mm-hmm. However, there is this idea of us versus them, this mentality that if you're not part of the in crowd, if you're not part of the in circle, then you're not really one of us. And therefore you are sinful. You are not meeting the mark. There is this idea in many Christian circles that, you don't want to mix with unleavened bread. That's a Christian term. What
does that mean? Because I've never heard that.
What it means is that, like, you don't want to mix like a Christian with an unchristian. Like, you wouldn't want to date, like a Christian wouldn't want to date a non-Christian because that would create an unequal balance.
Could it be because they're afraid of critical thinking skills and their ideology being challenged? I don't know.
That, Jamie, is a little, let's be a little nice. Be nice.
But yeah. So, I mean, when Seth is speaking about this, he's talking about, growing up in a Christian evangelical church where this is the rhetoric he has preached over and over again. I think that is really important for people that don't understand that ideology and why people are freaking out about what's in this text. It's the people with the lived experience know they're serious. And we're going to get into specifically how they plan on protecting Christians' religious freedom to discriminate against groups of people that don't believe in them, specifically like lined out in this document. But I really do think it's important for everyone to understand the overview. So the next part of the forward that I didn't even want to get into, they specifically mention pornography. And I want to get into that because there's a lot of language in this document that's trying to relate transness with just like being a trans person in general with pornography and something that is dangerous to children. So like, you know how if you think about all of the red states, right, where they have all this propaganda about the trans community and like they don't want trans people around their kids, and the drag queens reading fairy tales is like, you know, they're pedophiles. It's very much like even further drilled down in this document that they're like equating transness with unlawfulness. It's a very easy bridge to get. Okay. So getting back into it, page 5 of the Project 2025 Forward says, pornography manifests today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children. For instance, it is not a political Jordan, not inextricably binding up disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare. It has no claim to First Amendment protections. Its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. Pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purview it should be classed as registered sex offenders, and telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. Going to keep going because they get a little further into it here. And I want everyone to remember, because if you're not a member of the LGBTQ community, or you feel like this doesn't apply to me, or you're not a woman, or any of the issues I talked about so far, if anyone is trying to discriminate against a specific group of people, those discriminatory policies, like they always spread to other communities. And it's not just about one group. It's about all groups that are not like this group. So in here they say, the noxious tenets of critical race theory, in quotes, and gender ideology, in quotes, should be excised from curricula in every public school in the country. These theories poison our children, who are being taught on the one hand to affirm that the color of their skin fundamentally determines their identity and even the moral status, while on the other they are taught to deny the very creatureliness that inheres in being human and consists in accepting that the giveness of nature as men or women. I feel like this is crazy Christian talk that is boggling my brain. But anyway, allowing parents or physicians to reassign the sex of a minor is child abuse and must end. For public institutions to use taxpayer dollars to declare the superiority or inferiority of certain races, sexes, and religions is a violation of the Constitution and civil rights law and cannot be tolerated by any government anywhere in the country. I'm going to shut up there. And thoughts.
Now, I want to go back here. This idea, right, that they just mixed pornography with the transgender community. And essentially what they're doing is they're taking a hot topic issue that, whatever your opinions are on pornography, fine. I'm not gonna fight that, whatever your opinions might be. But the thing about it is they just mixed it and then used the transgender community as a way of like making it horrible. And the thing about it is if we look at actual statistics of who is actually perpetuating abuse, it's not the transgender community.
No, it's not.
It's not the LGBTQIA plus community. It's the church. This is what's so infuriating.
I feel you, darling. I've never, I think that what people need to recognize is, again, this is just, it's otherness. And I think that in the LGBT community, right, I think the most perplexing thing to people who are non-members is trans identities. It's very difficult for people outside that community to understand, probably because our culture as a whole is not designed to really accept that or be welcoming to that. It's very foreign. So they're taking this, which they know that a lot of Americans struggle with or don't fully understand, and then they are villainizing these people to try to create this otherness, and like they're scary. I've met a lot of drag queens, never met a scary one. They're usually funny as shit. And most people that I know in the LGBT community, because there's already so much discrimination, there's already so much bias, there's already so much internal turmoil that people go through because they know how difficult it's going to be. And even just in their own nuclear family, even if people who are in accepting families have that fear before they come out, because it's not easy to be not part of dominant culture. And I think that they're targeting these people to say they're scary because that's easier for people to believe, because I don't think most people in rural America maybe have had interactions with drag, like an actual drag queen. As a New Yorker who also just loves the LGBT community, I've always been an ally. I love drag. So I've met drag queens, but not everyone gets to experience that, right? I think the next like really surprising thing or upsetting thing to me, I don't know about you, was removing gender ideology from our curriculum, because I really feel like what the agenda is here is to erase like the LGBT community from our culture, like to pretend that it doesn't exist. Essentially, they want to remove like all language from our laws, which they've already said in every document, whatever. And they're going to remove it from our schools. And what we're really going to start seeing is like, like in Florida, these horrible state laws that have gone through in some really conservative states, like the Don't Say Gay law for teachers in Florida, that we're looking at that as being promoted as like federal policy. And that has serious consequences. Thoughts?
That's terrifying.
Oh, also, sorry, I forgot, because there's just so many horrifying things. The last paragraph where it says allowing parents or physicians to reassign the sex of a minor is child abuse, and must end. Child abuse. But that also is concerning, right? Because you have parents who are bringing their kids to therapy. Like, how many kids have to we work with as therapists who are struggling with trans identity? If that parent comes to me and that child comes to me and they're consulting with doctors, and they've like, some of these people have known since they were 4 years old that they felt like they were in the wrong body, and not providing them that care costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars in surgeries, and like psychological damage is you can't even put a number on that. One, they go through puberty and all these changes start happening, especially for men, because an Adam's apple is really hard to remove. Like you have physical changes to your body that are really hard to undo. So if people know that they're trans, to allow that child and that parent and their healthcare providers to make an informed decision, I to call that abuse is insane. It basically just means that if we don't agree with their ideology, whatever is against that Christian ideology, in my opinion, seems like is pretty much against the law at this point. Is that a crazy jump?
It is not crazy at all. And I think you're right on the money.
Well, that's unfortunate to hear, Seth. Thanks for the bad news. All right. So this whole next section, Seth, there are numerous pages in this document that speak to removing language protections for LGBT folks. We got into that already in the forward of removing all these terms. And then there's specifically stuff about redefining sex, getting rid of civil rights protections, and the Gender Policy Council. So we're going to go into all of that. We're going to start with page 475, radical redefinition of sex. Okay. On August 4th, 2022, HHS published a proposed rule entitled Non-Discrimination in Health Programs and Activities. This rule addresses non-discrimination provisions of the Affordable Care Act, known as Section 1557, which is enforced by the Office of Civil Rights and the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Section 1557 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, age, disability, and sex in covered health programs or activities. Under the proposed rule, sex is redefined. Discrimination on the basis of sex includes, but is not limited to, discrimination on the basis of sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, including intersex traits, pregnancy-related conditions, sexual orientation, and gender identities. In other words, the department proposes to interpret Section 1557 as if it created special privileges for new classes of people defined in ways that are highly ideological and unscientific. The redefinition of sex to cover gender identity and sexual orientation, and pregnancy to cover abortion, should be reversed in all HHS and CMS programs, as was done under the Trump administration. This also includes the Children's Health Insurance Program.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
they included CHIP.
Oh yeah, because God forbid our kids have gender affirming care. That would be us funding gender affirming care. I'm gonna move on because there is just so much love, and I want us to get through everything. So this is page 9.5. Okay. The Department of Health and Human Services, they really do go into gender protections here. And that is important, guys, because this is Medicare and Medicaid, and that is what larger insurance companies base what they have to cover over. Like, so if Medicare makes changes, a lot of the times even commercial insurance plans will make changes because Medicare is like the standard. So if they're trying to make changes to Medicare and Medicaid, that would not protect LGBTQ people. Even if you're not like using one of those services, it is very likely that corporate America will take a page from their book and choose to save money and not cover your services as well. So just remember that as I'm reading this. HHS should restore Section 1557, Section 504, and other or OCR regulations and fixed guidance documents. In 2020, the Trump administration OCR published regulations under Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act that restored the agency's enforcement of that law to limits of its statutory text, deferred to the ACA's widespread use of a binary biological conception of sex discrimination, and specified that the regulation must comply with the religious exemption and abortion neutrality clauses of Title IV, which it is derived, as well as the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and other laws. Courts blocked core provisions of that rule from going into effect. So what this is saying here, guys, is that they tried to dismantle the protections of the Affordable Care Act. And because of protections from Title IV, which they also want to just demolish, they were unable to do that. So we'll get into demolishing Title IV later, but that's what that's saying. In 2022, Biden administration proposed to reinstate a rule contradicting the scope of the statute and imposing non-discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So again, they're trying to undo legislation here that is protecting LGBTQ people. Any thoughts, Seth, before I get into their recommendations?
I'm just not surprised.
OCR should return its enforcement of sexual discrimination to the statutory framework of Section 1557 and Title IV. Specifically, it should remove all guidance issued under the Biden administration concerning sexual orientation and gender identity under Section 1557, particularly the May 2021 announcement of enforcement and March 2022 statement threatening states that protect minors from genital mutilation. So, so Biden's saying like you can't interfere in sex reassignment surgeries of children if their parents and healthcare providers are saying that they are in agreement with this and it's not harming the child and it is what is best for them mentally, because that's very much a part of a child's well-being is their mental well-being. If your mental isn't good, guys, all the physical shit goes as well. But Seth, I heard a scoff. So what is your commentary there?
Just the use of genital mutilation.
Oh yeah. Yeah. But circumcisions, because that's Christian. That's not genital mutilation.
No, of course not.
Of course not. Oh my goodness. Issue a general statement of policy specifying that it will not enforce any prohibition on sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination in Section 1557 regulation. And it's going to prioritize compliance with the First Amendment. So I think that's going back, Seth, to what we're going to get to later of First Amendment protections for free speech for Christians, but not for, LGBTQ people.
Agreed.
Okay. And the third thing they want to do is issue a proposed rule to restore the Trump regulations under Section 1557, explicitly interpreting the law not to include sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination based on the textual approach to male-female biology taken by Congress in the ACA, the need to recognize biological distinctions as part of the sound practice of healthcare, and the need to ensure protections of medical judgment and conscience. DOJ should agree to defend this rule to the Supreme Court if necessary. Yeah. Sip your tea, boy. That's a good response.
That's all I got.
It's a lot.
I mean, who's gonna be the DOJ? Is my question. And the Department of Justice, who's going to be in charge of that? Yeah. They have to have someone in that seat that they can manipulate and control. And that's how that's going to work, because they get to a point. So the point is that it's all about power and control and then enforcing their policies. And it's just infuriating.
Yeah. And I think that is real. No, I agree. And I think that is even scarier this time because, as we've already read, they've tried and failed, and putting people this whole document is a plan to put people in positions of power that would co-sign on all this bullshit. Like, right. Because the people that were there before, and honestly, guys, remember that it is mostly Republicans who stood up to this and said, hey, like, this is not America. This is not what I signed up for. Like, just because I might agree with you on ideology or certain policies doesn't mean that I agree that we should just dismantle our Constitution to make it easier to push our ideals. They want to remove those people and put in people that are going to co-sign. And that would mean like crazy systematic changes and no protections. And I think it's crucial that they note in there, like taking it to the Supreme Court, because they know that's already bought up, bro. So if it gets there, like, they ain't protecting us.
Right. They've already tried this. They've already been in power. They already know the rules. They already know the landscape. They know what to do now. That's why this is so scary. This is not just a plan that's scary. They actually know the freaking roadmap.
Yeah. And they're also like, you're right. And the next part of this that they want to dismantle is called the Gender Policy Council. And this, yes. So you know about this one, Seth?
Yes, I do. But go ahead. I'll let you lead the way.
Gender Policy Council. This is on page 62 of Project 2025. The president should immediately revoke Executive Order 41020 and every policy, including sub-regulatory guidelines, documents produced on behalf or related to the establishment or promotion of the Gender Policy Council and its subsidiary issues. So basically, they want to get rid of it. Abolishing the Gender Policy Council would eliminate central promotion of abortion, in quotes, they have health services, comprehensive sexuality education, in quotes, they have education, and the new woke gender ideology, which has a principal tenet, gender affirming care, also in quotes, and sex change, in quotes, surgery on minors. In addition to eliminating the council, developing new structures and positions will have the dual effect of demonstrating that promoting life and strengthening the family is a priority, while also facilitating more seamless coordination and consistency across the U.S. government. They should also specifically appoint a person to lead this, the next paragraph goes on to say. But Seth, in your opinion, what do you think, if they want to do away with this, what would a policy from your understanding in growing up in this that promotes life and strengthens families as a priority look like?
It's going to be essentially restriction of all forms of sexuality outside of heterosexuality. It will literally restrict anything that falls outside of the lines. But there's something I want to point out. But like they, first of all, they use the word woke, which I think is really interesting. And they're throwing in the words gender affirming care and sex change as woke and gender ideology, which is interesting. But they're saying sex change surgeries on minors. Isn't that misinformation? Because isn't that not happening?
I don't have the facts on that. I'm not
sure
going to say affirmatively. I don't know, because I personally haven't heard of a sex change surgery on a minor happening. I know that it's definitely not happening by the schools, like without parents' consent.
Going to school one day at one gender and leaving the next day.
That's definitely not happening. But hormone blockers and gender affirming care is happening for children, and they don't believe in that either. So I wanted to clear this up because I think it's really, really important to provide factual information. This is from which is the Human Rights Campaign. In all cases, gender affirming surgeries are only performed after multiple discussions between mental health providers and physicians, including endocrinologists and surgeons, to determine if surgery is appropriate course of action. Okay, usually aren't offered until patient becomes a legal adult, though exceptions can be made for minor teens who meet certain criteria. The general recommendation is for gender affirming surgeries to be done after 18 with limited exceptions. The patient should always be of an age where they have adequate maturity, including the ability to understand the potential risks and benefits of any treatment. Whether or not you agree with sex reassignment surgery, this is between that family and their healthcare provider. Again, not your child, not your business. If they can't do it to your kid, then no one's coming in taking your kid and forcing them to get a sex reassignment surgery if that's against your will. It's not happening. But for you to say that another family, another parent, another mother and a father or parents do not know their children well enough to make those decisions along with a team of medical doctors is insanity. And it's not appropriate. So yes, it can happen to children, but it's not this widespread thing. It is literally a minority of cases in extreme situations where it can really be shown that it is necessary and beneficial. They truly believe that it is psychologically harmful to provide affirming care, which honestly scares me as a social worker working in trauma. And, you know, we have a lot of people in our practice that specialize in LGBTQ issues because, yeah, you're nodding. Say why, Seth. Say why.
Well, yeah. Well, it's extreme. It's like, think about it from a parental perspective, from a parent's perspective of not knowing what to do. And then hearing from your government that if you make a wrong move, that you're doing something illegal by supporting your child in their own discovery of their own identity. Think about how complicated and how confusing that has to be. And again, this also reaches into the area of abortion as well. And that's completely different topic, but these issues also,
abortion affects LGBTQ people too, man.
But that's also an issue that's happening too. But the idea here is that people are getting to a point that they are scared to make a move for fear of persecution or fear of consequences in just supporting and helping their child find and support themselves and be true to themselves. That is a scary, scary thing. And what this policy is really doing is it's eliminating the ability for individuals to be themselves.
Oh, yeah,
and the policy that they would enact is going to be very stringent, very strict, and is not going to allow any wiggle room for any form of self-expression. Go ahead. I cut you off.
No, I agree. And I think that what you're talking about, that impact on the family system, the child, and like the taking that decision away from that family and their ability to make informed decisions about their kids. There are other specific attacks on LGBTQ families in general in this document that I also wanted to outline, because I think it is really, really important for people to understand, because there are many members of the LGBT community who are parents. And, you know, by trying to make everyone in the LGBTQ like community othered, they're basically saying that by virtue of you being part of this community and being less than and not agreeing with our man-woman ideology, you are psychologically harmful to those children. And I think there's significant implications and consequences of that. And I think there's also significant consequences for like the community at large. Because even as a provider, right, part of this document is undermining people's ability to take action if they are discriminated against. Right. So in states like Texas, I remember I was appalled because there was a law that came out that allowed social workers to refuse to see clients because of their gender identity, which is literally against our code of ethics.
Right.
But it allows people, it's giving them the legal authority to practice unethically. And we are supposed to be like, you know, you want to talk about like professions that are like Jesus. I mean, social workers, God, we're like, come tell us all of your stories and we're going to champion you and help you see all your strengths. Like, that is what we're here for. And you have people reaching out to care in Texas, and they're being like, literally, I mean, you go off on this all the time, Seth, about using Christian counseling or like God ideology in counseling when people have been harmed by the church. Like, you are so co-signing on all of this, and it has systematic consequences to people being able to access care, to care being performed in a way that is actually shown by science to be supportive and helpful and what these people need. If you are sending people to counselors who can discriminate against them because they're gay and are further emboldened to preach Christian rhetoric at people who have been harmed in a church, that does serious damage.
Mm-hmm. It's damage that causes serious trauma.
Yeah.
That honestly lasts a lifetime.
But that's why they're doing this, because this whole document is like a walking sign that's like, hey, all of these different groups please do something, or there's going to be significant consequences that will be experienced for generations of intergenerational trauma from the outcomes of these policies.
Bingo.
Ugh. All right. Specifically on families, guys, because I'm sorry, I got on my high horse again. It happens. I'm passionate.
Hard not to on
It's
an
really
issue like
hard
this.
not to. So on page 454, they specifically talk about families. And what bothered me about this is it appears to me, and you can tell me your impression, Seth, that this is trying to make it so that LGBTQ families are not viewed as legitimate families. So from the beginning, families comprised of a married mother, father, and their children are the foundation of a well-ordered nation and healthy society. Unfortunately, family policies and programs under the Biden HHS are fraught with agenda items focusing on LGBT equity, subsidizing single motherhood, disenfranchising work, and penalizing marriage. These policies should be repealed and replaced by policies that support the formation of stable married nuclear families. I'm going to go down a little further, and they say, in the context of current emerging reproductive technologies, HHS policies should never place the desires of adults over the right of children to be raised by their biological fathers and mothers who conceived them. In cases involving biological parents who are found by a court to be unfit because of, we're not going to get into that. We're all ended who conceived them. But to me, that says that if you, because what IVF is, right? If you as a gay man and your partner went to me and was like, Jamie, I want you to donate your embryos and carry my kids, right? I could then have more rights to that kid because I am a biological parent than maybe you and your spouse would. And I'd probably even have more say in court to gain access to those children if these things go through, because you're automatically viewed, because you are gay, as a lesser parent. You are a lesser human in their eyes. Thoughts? And I'll pull up the next one, love.
Well, we're essentially going back to, honestly, the repealing of gay marriage. Like this is all moving in that direction, because they're talking about a nuclear family. They're talking about the redefinition of what a family is, which honestly reeks of J.D. Vance, and many of the things that he has said. And I know that we should only focus on the policy, but it's like reeks throughout.
Oh, honestly, though, to mention J.D. Vance, if you watch the Vance Walls, debate, there was a Freudian slip in there that was gold. It was a golden nugget. You heard it, Seth? You tell them. Because it was.
I'm going to say it wrong, but he essentially mentioned we can't summarize a document
900-page document.
It's like, wait a second, what document are you speaking of that's so long, Mr. Vance?
He literally said 900-page document. I think Walsh challenged him on you're not getting into any of your policies, and he's like, how am I supposed to get into a 900-page plan in a debate? And it's like, oh, okay, so Project 2025 isn't your plan. If you look on their website, guys, their plan is 16 pages. And I was laughing with Seth last night because it looked like a high schooler made it. The front of it is this text. It's like, this is our proposal. And it literally looks like a high school student project. And it has no outline details. It's literally just talking points with no actual plan. Those talking points from Agenda 47 match up perfectly with Project 2025, which is the plan, which they have kind of told us a million times, but will never outright say it's the plan, because they know that Americans do not want this shit, which is why they're trying to divide us and tell us that, drag queens are trying to, turn your friggin' kids gay. It's nuts. Anyway.
I don't know
something
what the thing about it is. They've got a lot of opinions.
They do have a lot of opinions, but the next thing they said about the family agenda, the Secretary's anti-discrimination policy statement should never conflate sex with gender identity and sexual orientation. Rather, the Secretary should proudly state that the men and women are biological realities that are crucial to the advancement of life science and medical care, and that married men and women are the ideal natural family structure because all children have a right to be raised by the men and women who conceive them.
So we're going back to the whole idea of it only matters if you're born by the individual. It's about the biological parents, not the parents that actually care and love for you.
Yeah. And I think that, to me, as someone who's like really tied to IVF, I think that a lot of the reason they're against it, and yes, I think it has a lot to do with it allowed for LGBTQ couples to create families, right? And it allowed for them to create their own families. And there was always adoption, but let's be real. Most of those adoption agencies are run by Christian nonprofits who will not give them children. So IVF allowed for an entire, like generation of people who could now like actually conceive. And not that that's even easy, because it's still a lot of money. There's a lot of barriers to creating a family that way, but it's an option for people that they've been able to utilize. And they don't want that because they think that that is just toxic to society as a whole. Like the existence is toxic. And that's really what they're drilling in here. Gosh, I'm gonna breathing. Okay. There's a lot of attacks here on trans folks, Seth.
Yeah, I'm aware.
I'm just gonna, I'm gonna list the page numbers for everyone because it's a lot.
And we could talk, quite honestly, after reviewing a lot of Project 2025, specifically in light of the trans community, we could honestly have not just one episode. Yeah. We could have an entire podcast series on what the Project 2025 does and is proposing against the trans community.
Yeah, I'm going to just do a summary of what I found on 4 specific pages that was specifically focused on just like the trans community. Page 485, they're going over their threatening trans affirming care. We also heard that ideology on, it's all throughout the HSS section. Is just trans affirming care is not a thing that they want. Page 474, sex reassignment surgery and Medicare guidelines is specifically mentioned there. Page 284, they talk about defunding research on gender identity issues and LGBTQ related health concerns, because within those communities there are specific health related issues and they would like to defund that. I'm sure we can, like HIV and AIDS is something that they don't think the funding should go to, because again, they view the LGBTQ community as a lesser community that does not deserve their resources because they are sinners. That is my personal opinion. I'm not sure. Oh, okay. I'm not sharing. And the last one was on page 104, which is something that a lot of people have mentioned, which is the trans ban of the military. But there's a lot on trans rights in here, and specifically targeting trans people. But this does affect cisgendered people as well. And I think it's important to note that a lot of the sections where they're talking or coming after trans identities or gender identities in general, they're also targeting people with disabilities. They're targeting women. They're targeting all these other groups. It's not just one. But I really wanted us to have the time, Seth, to go into Title IV and the Bostock and Clayton County case, because those are 2 major pieces of legislation that Project 2025 specifically wants to dismantle, because they have held to protect LGBTQ rights. And I think it's really important for people to understand that this is not just rhetoric. This is a very well thought out policy that goes, oh, okay, these laws are the ones that have prevented us from being able to discriminate and being able to push these people out. And they feel like it's impeding on their religious freedoms. So they're trying to now undo these laws so they just have free reign. And so I think it's really important for everyone to understand what those laws are actually saying. So the discussion on Title IV starts on
585, I think.
333.
Oh, that part.
This whole section. Oh, this one makes my stomach turn. I'm sorry. Yeah. But it makes my stomach turn. Okay. We're going to start though. So this is under the Department of Education. And I think the reason it makes my stomach turn so much is like, you're talking about children. This is about children. I can't, but we have to. So we'll start here. They want to commence a new agency rulemaking process to rescind the current administration's Title IV regulations and restore the Title IV regulations promulgated by then Secretary Betsy DeVos God, I hated Betsy DeVoe on May 19th, 2020. She's the one that tried to like ban free lunch for students. Like she is just like, she doesn't believe in our public education system whatsoever and believes that, you know, we shouldn't have free education and it should all be charter schools and homeschooling. It's fucking nuts. But anyway, back to it. So they want to define sex under Title IV to mean only biological sex recognized at birth. Work with Congress to amend Title IV to include due process requirements. Define sex under Title IV to mean only biological sex recognized at birth and strengthen protections for faith-based educational institutions, programs, and activities.
Yep.
So give them the green light to say, because you're gay, you can't come here. You're not welcome. The Trump administration's 2020 Title IV regulation protected the foundational right to due process for those who are accused of sexual misconduct. This pissed me off. The Biden administration's proposed changes to the interpretation of Title IV disposes of those rights. So if people in these religious organizations are accused of sexual misconduct, they don't want them like removed from the agency immediately until due process. So they're allowed to just be like predators the whole time. Is that? I know from talking to Mary Byler, that's clearly a fucking thing that goes on, but
it is.
Is that what they're referring to here?
I believe so.
Okay. Just double checking because I don't. The next administration should move quickly to restore the rights of women and girls and restore due process protections for accused individuals. There is no scientific or legal basis for redefining sex to sexual orientation and gender identity in Title IV. Such a change misrepresents the U.S. Supreme Court's opinions in Bostock, threatens the American system of federalism, removes important due process protections for students in higher education, and puts girls and women in danger of physical harm. Facilitating social gender transition without parental consent increases the likelihood that children will seek hormone treatments such as puberty blockers, which are experimental medical interventions. And research has not demonstrated positive effects and long-term outcomes of these treatments, and the unintended side effects are still not fully understood. The next administration should abandon this change, redefining sex to mean sexual orientation and gender identity in Title IV immediately across all departments. On the first day in office, the next administration should signal its intent to enter the rulemaking process to restore the Trump administration's Title IV regulation with the additional insistence that sex, in quotes, is properly understood as a fixed biological fact. Official notice and comment should be posted immediately. So again, only male, female, no mention of gender identity, sexual orientation. It's just not a thing. You don't exist in their eyes. At the same time, the political appointees in this Office for Civil Rights should begin a full review of Title IV investigations that were conducted on the understanding that sex referred to gender identity or sexual orientation. All ongoing investigations should be dropped, and all school districts affected should be given notice that they are free to drop any policy changes pursued under pressure from the Biden administration. So yeah, they're basically going after all Title IV. Like Title IV was expanded, and we're going to get into that court case that they did mention in here because that's the next thing they want to reverse. But they believe that, gender identity or sexual orientation is not something that should have legal protections, and they want to take that away from our students. And for me as a clinician, I think about how, our LGBT youth have the highest suicide rates as it is, and we're going to take away Can you help me here, Seth?
Yeah.
Because
what we're doing is we're already taking a vulnerable population that's already at a very high risk of suicide, and we're going to essentially strip them of the very protections that they have that are the very
limited,
thin fabric of protections that they already have, and we're going to take that away. What do we think is going to happen? Well,
we're co-signing on bigots discriminate. It's people don't want to think that this stuff happens, but there are teachers that are homophobic. There are teachers that believe in this rhetoric. And, if we're not going to protect people on the basis of their sexual orientation or their gender identity, research actually shows that does have serious impact on our kids. Whether or not they are accepted at home or in school has a big difference on their mental health, especially during that time. And so many of these kids, in New York, New York is very weird. So the city is very blue, but the rest of New York is actually very Republican. We have a lot of the same ideologies. A lot of the people in the outside of New York City are very, very red. So a lot of the parents I work with actually say when they initially come into my office with a child, they'll say like, oh, they learn this from their peers, or they truly don't understand. And they want you to like fix them. And I think that for so many of those kids, like some of those parents you're able to get on board, but not all of them. For some of those kids, the schools are their sanctuaries. Like, what happens to the Gay Straight Alliance in those schools?
Right.
Like, what happens to these? And that's a very small thing, but for some kids, that's a freaking lifeline. That's all they have in the world to know that they're accepted. Right. And schools provide so much of that for kids. And I'm literally like tearing up. It really bothers me because it's like, this has serious consequences on our youth. And like, I don't understand why anyone would say my child shouldn't be subjected to that. Like, bro, if your kids are in middle school and high school, let me tell you, they're talking about sex and homosexuality and all of that stuff without like whether they're gay or straight. And no one is going to turn your kid gay because, as I said earlier in the episode, it's a very difficult. No one wants to be outside the norm. What I have not met a single person that was like, oh, I'm outside of the dominant culture group. And it was just positive from the beginning. Like, no, like it's a hard thing. No one wants that.
Also, there's another dynamic that I want to just mention, and it got brought up in this section, but it also applies to all of the trans information that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But think about this. All right. Think about female to male going back into female bathrooms that have already been on hormone blockers.
Well, it just makes it unsafe for them.
Exactly.
It really is. I remember it's just not, it makes it unsafe for them to be their authentic selves in public, which is why I think for trans people, they are so much more disproportionately affected by negative LGBTQ rhetoric because they are the most easily identifiable as part of that community. I mean, if someone met you on the street said they wouldn't know you're a gay man just by looking at you, they can't.
Right.
Like, and that.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take people with beards. No, like literally.
I was just thinking of like beards, like as in, sorry, like gay culture beards, but anyway.
No. Fine. We're going to take people with facial hair.
Yes.
And put them back into female bathrooms.
Yeah.
How's that gonna jive?
No, they're just not gonna be able to go to the bathroom in public. And I mean, and in some communities that's already the case, but like we have been trying to make strides as I think as a nation to be more accepting. Like the new generation is way more accepting, way more open to the, like, this is old white Christian men rhetoric. Like, I don't think the majority of the country even agrees with this. And I understand that
it just bothers me. This whole rhetoric bothers me because what we're doing is we're putting kids, we're putting adults, we're putting this entire population of people who are already othered in our society, and we're putting them at a much greater risk. And it is so dangerous. It is so scary. And this is a big problem. That's all I want to emphasize. And I'll leave it there.
I very much agree. The Biden administration, LGBTQ advocates, and some federal courts have attempted to expand the scope and definition of sex discrimination based in part on the Supreme Court's decision in Bostock v. Clayton County. If you don't know what this is, as the document says, Bostock held that an employer who fires someone simply for being homosexual or transgender violates Title VII's prohibitions against sex discrimination. The court explicitly limited its holding to firing content in Title VII and did not purport to address other Title VII issues such as bathrooms, lockers, or dress codes, or other laws prohibiting sex discrimination. Notably, the court focused on the status of employees and used the term transgender status rather than a broader amorphous term gender identity. Okay, keeps going, but they want to undo this. It grants protections for homosexuality and or being gay and being trans. So they want to restrict the application of Bostock. The new administration should restrict Bostock's application of sex discrimination protections to sexual orientation and gender status in the context of hiring and firing. So you no longer have equal protections in the workplace. Withdraw unlawful notices and guidances. The president should direct agencies to withdraw unlawful notices and guidances purporting to applying Bostock's reasoning broadly outside of hiring and firing. Rescind regulations prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics. The president should direct agencies to rescind regulations interpreting sex discrimination provisions as prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics. So again, you don't exist. And, if someone is discriminating against you for these issues, they don't think you should have any protection. Direct agencies to refocus enforcement of sex discrimination laws. The president should direct agencies to focus their enforcement of sex discrimination laws on the biological binary meaning of sex. So basically, all of these agencies that, like, as an employer, right, I have to follow employment laws and not discriminate against people because of their sexual orientation. They're basically making it so that the law would say, they don't have any right to go after me if I did discriminate against someone for being LGBTQ in my hiring decisions, because that's not a protected class. It's just there's male or female. You don't exist. Thoughts, Seth, before I get into the religion aspect of it?
It really undermines the entire essence of the American society. Like, what are we known for? Home of the brave, the land of the free. Are we not?
I 110% agree.
So, like, this entire premise is like taking what we are known for as a country and undermining it.
Yeah.
What it's going to do is it will deconstruct. It will I don't know the word I'm looking for, but I think deconstruct is what I'll go with. It will deconstruct the foundation of freedom in our country and in our institutions.
So it's ripping, it's tearing apart the foundation. They're literally saying, like, hey, Title IV and this and all of these protections that we have gotten, right? I want to be very clear because I don't want to propagate misinformation. It does not mention rolling back gay marriage anywhere in this document specifically, but eliminating you as an entire group of people does that. If we're going to remove all language around gender, sexual orientation, all of that, from what that does is make that document obsolete, because who is it protecting? Because you don't exist.
So what's the point? Right.
That is what people are saying. Because I've heard so many things floating around about, like, Project 2025 says nothing about gay marriage. It has all these policies that would have serious intended consequences for the legislation around gay marriage. Yes.
Right. And part of the reason that we get married is to have protections. What they're doing is they're dismantling the protections that we're currently receiving under marriage, that marriage would provide. So there would be no point other than there'd be no point other than just a civil union.
This, I think, ties it all in for us. So this is the end of that page, same page where it was talking about sex discrimination laws. They have this title of religion. This is page 585. And Seth, I'm going to let you take it right after this, because this is your jam and what I want you to speak to. So, okay. So we're going to get back into the document. We're on page 585 under the title. At the bottom of the page, it says religion. They want to, and I quote, provide robust protections for religious employers. It says many Americans' religious diversity means that workplace include people from many faiths and that many employers are faith-based. Nevertheless, the Biden administration has been hostile to people of faith, especially those with traditional beliefs about marriage, gender, and sexuality. The new administration should enact policies with robust respect for religious exercise in the workplace, including under the First Amendment, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, Title VII, and federal conscience protection laws. It goes on to further basically say that religious employers are free to run their businesses according to their religious beliefs, general non-discrimination laws notwithstanding, and support participation of religious employees and employers as federal contractors and in federal activities and programs. So also, like, if you discriminate against people, right, like, part of this is part of creating equity in our, like, in the larger culture, right, and pushing through these changes was that you had to kind of hold the bigots accountable. And they would allow for these organizations to use religious exemptions to not cover this. This also bothers me, though, because this isn't just like purely church nonprofits. We're not talking about just church nonprofits this would apply to. This would also just apply, like, for me as a business owner, if I want to say, oh, well, I'm Catholic, so I don't agree with this, and save money. Which, how many corporations do that, by the way? Save money and say, oh, well, I'm going to take this religious exemption and now I don't have to cover abortion, any of these surgeries or any of this care, which would significantly reduce my costs and increase my profits. Like, these are the things that will happen. It's not going to be listed out in you for black and white, but I need people to understand that when we put a plan in place, there are consequences, and those consequences are things that we're going to have to use our critical thinking skills to kind of figure out what could happen. But yeah, Seth.
Well, what's going to happen is that people they'll create shortcuts around the system. They will cheat the system to their own personal gain. That's what we see in any system, any policy, any procedure that is ever created. There are loopholes. There are ways to use that policy to your own personal gain. And that's what you need to think about when you read Project 2025 is to think about the consequences of these policies and what does it actually what's going to happen? How can people use this to their own personal gain? And when we look at this, when we look at how this is going to be used, we have been fighting for years on like the freedom for the LGBTQ community to be able to be able to get a wedding cake, for example, or to be able to do their own wedding where they want to. And then, that's been in the news for a long time. That's an old issue.
But like we were saying too, like adopting children is an issue, like creating families is an issue for them. Buying houses is like they are systematically discriminated against, and there's are reasons that we need to put protections in place for these people. And as an employer, like I laugh at Seth last week, I was like, as an employer, I can say some of these policies are really a pain in the ass, and there are people that do abuse policies, but that doesn't mean that I would ever not want a policy to be in place, because they are needed to protect our most vulnerable people. And the LGBT community is part of one of our most vulnerable communities within our country.
Correct.
So we need to protect the vulnerable. That is our duty. And even as Christians, right? Like that is from what I learned from Christianity, which is nowhere near what Seth learned because he studied that Bible. Like he could cite any it's ridiculous. When we try to talk Bible, like I sound like I'm speaking a foreign language at a fifth grade, like at a 5-year-old level. And Seth just like laughs at me because he could literally probably recite it inside and out because that's how into religion he was. But what I learned about Christianity, the overall themes is acceptance and loving others. Like that is why people buy into this. It's because it's this beautiful story about like love and community and lifting each other up and hope and not judging other people and helping your neighbor. And like everything that this is preaching is just like, they are not us and they are bad. And it's like, didn't Jesus hang out with like whores and lepers and shit? Like, I don't know. I think with the gays. I don't know.
Literally is used in the Bible. Actually, I think the word prostitute is. But the issue here is that Jesus totally did. But the point is that like it goes against the entire rhetoric of Christ's message, and these policies have consequences. And the consequences are very, very severe. And what this is going to do is they're taking religion and they're using it to their own personal gain by restricting the rights, privileges, and ability for vulnerable populations to have equal footing against other people in our society. And that will be devastating for millions of people in this country if this goes into place. And that is why this is so important that we talk about it. It's so important that we write about it. It's so important that we talk about it. Like, even if, and this is something I want to point out as we kind of wrap up here, because even if this election does not result in the way that we are nervous that it will, these ideas, this rhetoric is still in play. Like, even if.
And we're still not protected in our Constitution. So, just because we win this time doesn't mean that if we don't do anything about it, we're still at risk next time.
Right. And that's the thing. So like, even if Kamala wins, like these ideas are still very much in play. They're still in all of our red states. Like these are voting members of our United States of America, and it's being perpetuated throughout. So it's important that we're aware of it, that we know about what's actually being taught, what's actually being believed, because we have to be on guard.
Yeah. And I think we have to know and combat the disinformation, because the goal is really to other and demonize. And we do that to make people seem less human. And there's a reason that you're doing that, because then it justifies discrimination against these people because they are less than you. And I don't think that most Americans feel that way. I think even if you're on the total opposite side of the aisle of me and Seth, most people do not believe that someone is less than based on their sexual orientation. Like, that is just not the belief of the majority of Americans. And I urge people to think about, like, in a future of our children, do we want them raised in a society where this is the rhetoric we're promoting, right? Like, we don't want them educated on any of these things. Like, I don't know when it became bad to understand cultural diversity, like the differences in culture. Like, that's what makes us a great nation. And taking that away from us is honestly robbing our children of what makes this country amazing. And it's really like, it doesn't contribute to their growth as people. Like, I make it a point when my kids, because kids are going to say dumb things because they're kids. Like, my kids have said dumb things about people with disabilities on the playground, or like, people holding hands, but it's an opportunity to educate them about the differences in community and being an accepting, morally humble human being. And we should be teaching this. So anywho, Seth, I know you got to go, my love. So for our listeners, I know you have, and I mentioned this at the beginning, I know you have a course coming out.
I do.
That really is going to go into this. And I know you have another book coming out, and maybe we'll have you on the podcast down the line when that's closer. But where can people follow you? So if they found this interesting, or they want to hear more from you about Christian nationalism and how it's affecting the community as a whole, and this rhetoric, where can they follow you? Where can they find you so that they are up to date when all this wonderful stuff comes out?
Yeah. So I have a professional profile at SethShowalter.com. There you will find information about the book that I currently have out. However, I will be putting information out about the course that I'm going to be coming out with in about 3 months. As well as that'll be coming out as part of the Choir Academy, which will be a big launch. As well as part of that, I will also be offering a free webinar that people can join and actually be a part of. And if you join that live webinar, which will be specifically on conversion therapy and the damages of conversion therapy, which will be really interesting, because as we talk about the dismantling of LGBTQ rights in this country, I hate to say it, but guess what? Conversion therapy is going to be coming back in many of these conservative states. So we need to be talking about it. We need to be talking about how damaging that is and how traumatic that is. And so I'm going to be coming out with a course that corresponds with my book, and that'll be coming out in about 3 months. However, if you join my live course, or my live webinar, you'll get a free promo with a discount for the course itself. And then also I will be coming out with a chapter that will be part of a collaborative book that will be specifically targeting the dark side of Christian nationalism, which will talk about a lot of the things involved in Project 2025 and how damaging it is to vulnerable populations in the United States of America. Regardless of whether Trump wins or not, because these messages are prevalent in our society, whether or not he wins. And we need to be on guard. So check out information at SethShowalter.com.
Definitely. And I will have Seth's links in our show notes as well. Seth, thank you so much for coming on. What were you going to say, darling?
Also, you can also check me out on TikTok if you are on the TikTok app. My TikTok profile is Seth_2034. And you can also find me on Facebook.
Awesome. We'll have all Seth's links in the show notes. I really do recommend you read his book, A Surrender to Authenticity. Thank you for being on. Thank you for listening today. I want to remind you guys that you are good enough.
Thank you for listening to Good Enough with the Trauma Therapist. We appreciate you listening. While our host may provide some personal and professional advice, we want to remind you that this show is for entertainment purposes only. Each individual situation is unique, and good enough is not a substitute for mental health treatment. If you need a therapist and are located in New York or Missouri, feel free to reach out to us at liendr.com or resilient-mo.com.